Hi, my name's David Southard from Wild Arena and I'm a wildlife photographer, and we spend a lot of time not only taking pictures but also helping other people take pictures with our business Wild Arena.
Hi, I'm Janet Southard. I'm also a wildlife photographer, although I specialise in macro. David does the majority of the workshops, I do some with him as well, but I also look after our small animal team.
So Wild Arena's been going about 20 years and we are currently splitting our time between KNOWSLEY Safari Park, where we've been for about 10 years, and up in Scotland, where we're doing lots of landscape and wildlife photography. And we are talking to you today about safari park and zoo photography. So the plan is that we're going to head out in a minute and see if we can go find some animals and talk to you about some of the common problems and ways that we can overcome those problems to get the best pictures out of the opportunities that those animals present. We'll probably do a little bit from the car, which is more kind of the safari park side of things, and then maybe a little bit more on foot with a fence line, which is a real kind of common problem in a zoo scenario. So we want to talk to you a little bit about equipment. Of course, equipment is not the be all and end all, but it is the tool that enables us to take the pictures that we want to take. We are Canon shooters, and it's a little bit of an odd time at the moment because we are transitioning from the mirrored bodies, things like the 1DX Mark III with the EF mount lenses, across to mirrorless bodies with the RF mount with things like the R5. It's important probably to talk about things like focal length of lens, because that really impacts on the kind of pictures that we are able to achieve, particularly in that kind of zoo and safari park setting. And it wouldn't be surprising for me to say that, of course, we are majoritively using telephoto lenses in that scenario. So I'm using the R5 a lot at the moment, mostly with an EF RF lens adapter with lenses like the 100 to 400 L series, and that's really versatile for the kind of things that we're looking at today. Gives me a ability to kind of zoom in and out and frame and compose the pictures in different ways. All of the bodies that we're using are full frame, and of course that has a little bit of an impact on the focal length of lens that we would need to use. So we are using lots of kind of 300, 400, 500 mm lenses, which if you're using smaller sensor bodies, either 1.4, 1.5 times crop, APS-C, or down to a 2 times crop with micro four thirds, then those focal lengths are going to be shorter. We can kind of translate that back again. But certainly for me, things like the R5 with 100, 400 are perfect.
And I'm using the R6. I was historically using the 1 series cameras, so this has been quite a change for me. But actually I'm getting on really well with this, and how you can program the back buttons is really giving me the functionality that I used to have on the 1 series anyway. And as I said earlier, I do a lot of macro photography, so I've got my very trusty 100mm macro that I use in the studio an awful lot. And out in the safari park, the 100, 500. So we're just heading out into the safari park to have a drive around, and we find the best thing to do is literally just to drive around and see what you can find. Animals can be quite unpredictable, so the best thing to do is to see what is out and what is working for you, rather than planning what you're going to do. We also drive round more than once, which you can in most safari parks in the UK. And again, the animals do different things through the day, so it's worth keep driving around to see what they're doing. So we're going to head off now and see what we can find. So before you head out into the safari park, it's worth thinking about a few things. Once you're past those gates into the park, you can no longer get out of your car safely. So one thing I think about is how clean your windows are. When you're going through the lions and the baboons, you won't be able to take those windows down. So give them a clean before you go in, and that will really help you get nice pictures through those windows. But we will talk more about that as we go round. So the first thing it looks like we're going to encounter are the camels, and they're actually going to be really close to the road. So because I've got my 100-400 on the camera, I'm going to try and maybe get some headshots because they are really, really close to the edge of the road. It's a lovely time of year to see these guys because they've got their winter coats on, so they look very different to how they look in the summer. So I'm using ISO 800 today. It's fairly bright, so that should give me enough speed without getting any degradation of quality in the picture. And I'm using an aperture of f8 because I've got a couple of animals that I'm looking at, so I want to drive that depth of field out a little bit. So that was great, the camels came right over to us, but the most important thing when you are in a safari park is to check what their rules are. So here there is no feeding of any of the animals, no touching. So as he got close to us, we then drove off so that we weren't actually interacting with the camel at all, but it gave us a lovely opportunity. So we're just approaching the rhinos. It's quite a cold day here today, so they're actually in one of the shelters on the hay to stay nice and warm. And this is where my long lens is really gonna come into play for me, because I can try and zoom in as much as possible and ignore all of that messy background of the barn and all the hay and the feeders, and just try and get some nice headshots of the rhino. Another thing that I will think about here is colour is not as important for me in this shot, so I might actually take a black and white picture because of the texture of the rhino's skin. That will really lend itself to a nice black and white picture. So I am shooting in RAW today, but I am going to turn my picture style to monochrome because I want to see what I'm likely to get. It's not going to make any difference to my RAW file, but it helps me see what I'm going to get on the back of the camera. So I've changed my settings around a little bit. I've bumped my ISO up to 1000 and I've actually put my aperture to f14. I've zoomed in really tight, so I've got no background that I actually need to blur out. So I want to get as much of the rhino in focus as I can. At 800 ISO, my shutter speed was dropping to 640, which is absolutely acceptable, but she is moving a bit and we're in a car that is still with the engine running, so that'll get a bit of vibration into it. So I wanted to drive that shutter speed a little bit faster. So we can just see the bison over to our left. So this is a fantastic example of thinking about what to include or what to exclude in the picture. On my left-hand side, we've got one of the bison stood in his food, just having a bit of a browse, but there's a feeder in the background. There's lots of messy food on the floor. He might be looking at me, but there's a lot in that picture that detracts from making a nice pretty picture. Whereas on my right hand side, I've got two bison just sat down in a lovely natural woodland setting. There's no feed bowls, there's no food on the floor. They're not looking at me, but if I'm patient and I sit here, most animals, be it prey or predator, are inquisitive and they want to know what's happening in their environment. So therefore, if they know you're there, at some point they will look at you because they want to know what you're doing. So patience is the real key here. So I'll wait for them to turn around and look at me because they want to know what I'm doing. So this is very exciting. I can see that Froa, the European elk here, is just out on the road in front of us. Her being on the road maybe is not the best thing, but we can get a really nice headshot of her. She's one of the animals here that hides really well. So when you do drive round nice and slowly, really looking out for what might be there. She can get into the undergrowth and hide exceptionally well, but she's out on the road for us today so we can get a nice picture. So Froa unfortunately did move off of the road and she has gone and stood right next to a fence. So with the best will in the world, I won't be able to get rid of that fence. So I did manage to get a couple of pictures just before she walked away, but I'll probably drive on and see what else there is to see. So we're just heading into the lions, and in all of the safari parks in the UK, as we've said earlier, do look at what their rules are, but I'm pretty sure with all of them, when you go into the lions, you shouldn't open your windows. Luckily for us, when we do our workshops, because we've got keepers with us, we are able to do that. But today, so that you can get the best out of this how-to, we're going to shoot through the windows and show you the best way to do that.
Roger.
So we're in here now with the lions, and I have to say they are sat in a lovely spot in the sunshine, which is really nice. I can try and get some nice shots of them. They've got 6 lions here at Knowsley, and like a few other collections, they have a castrate male in with the group, which means that he loses his mane. So you might think it's a very butch big girl, but it is actually a male lion. They've also got Sam, who's the big head of the pack, with his lovely, beautiful mane. I'm going to be shooting through the window here. So what you want to try and do is line your lens up flat on the window and make sure that your lens hood is on, so that you are reducing that glare of any light actually falling onto the window. So safari park settings are really great for photography. Just do bear in mind following those rules. They're not there just to keep us safe, they're also there for the welfare of the animals. So you need to stay on the road because it gives the animals their own space, their own territory, somewhere they're not going to be bothered by humans. So sticking to the rules really helps ensure that we stay safe and the animals stay happy.
So in some safari parks there are drive-through enclosures, but also drive-past enclosures where there is a fence between you and the animals. And obviously as a normal visitor, to follow the rules, you'll be inside your car and shooting from the vehicle a distance from the fence. And we're going to cover shooting through fences in a little bit. But we're very lucky here because we're working with the team. We are able to do things beyond the rules, which give us access for pictures in a way that we couldn't do as a normal visitor. So we're able to hop out with guys like the wolves here, and that means we can get right up to the fence line and shoot pictures without that kind of problem of the fence getting in the way. So providing we can keep these guys' attention, we might grab a camera while they're still out and see if we can get some pictures. So we've got the wolves just out and showing a little bit of attention. It's quite bright sunshine today, and the way that we shoot through this fence is to get the cameras right up against it so that we can line up the lens with a hole in the mesh rather than a cross in the mesh. Just as Janet was talking about earlier, we still have to think a little bit about the angle and the focal length of lens so that we're getting compositions that are kind of pretty and naturalistic, trying to avoid as many of the man-made parts of the enclosure as we can. Janet's shooting some pictures already. And these kind of 100, 400, 100, 500 lenses are perfect for that, because if the animals are a bit closer, we can zoom out. If they're a little bit further away, then we can use that magnification to zoom in. And it's these kind of opportunities that really enable us on the workshops to get people pictures that they would struggle to do as normal visitors. It's all about holding the animals' interest, their attention. We don't want to be doing anything that's kind of impacting on them in a negative way, but they will be used to vehicles pulling up and interacting with them in a positive way with things like food. So we haven't got any food today, but we can, if you like, kind of just pretend that we are a vehicle that might be doing that kind of thing, which holds their attention for a little bit. It means that we've got the animals looking much more attentive. Their ears are up, their eyes are open, we can get kind of head-on shots, get that kind of eye contact, and all of those things make for better pictures. If we're using those lenses, the 400, 500mm lenses to zoom in, maybe more kind of head and shoulder shots, that pretty much eliminates the context, the enclosure, and hopefully means that we'll get some really naturalistic portrait pictures. So we've just come down to the walk around area of the safari park, which is much more zoo-like. So it's really designed for people to come around on foot, the on-foot safari. And we've come down to the Amur tiger exhibit just to talk about kind of shooting through fence lines in a normal zoo environment. This is fairly typical behind me. So we have Myron, the Amur male tiger, just padding up and down. And then there's the main fence line, the fence line that obviously contains the tiger, and then this small standoff fence. This means that the public are always kept 2 or 3 meters away from the main fence so that it keeps everyone nice and safe. And that's a problem for pictures, because we are really going to struggle to take a picture of the tiger without that fence being in the shot. Now, there are a couple of very simple rules that help us at least alleviate some of that difficulty. The first one is really choice of settings. So we're just going to think about our settings a little bit, and we're going to prioritize shooting with relatively wide apertures. Wide apertures will deliver a narrow or shallow depth of focus or depth of field, and that will help throw some of the fence out of focus. So the 100-400 lens is a maximum aperture of 5.6 at the long end. So 5.6 will be much better than, say, f8 or f11. Quite bright at the moment, so I can probably drop the ISO down, still get a reasonably fast shutter speed, balance up those other things, but certainly prioritizing wide apertures. The other key consideration is the variation in distance of myself as the photographer and the subject, the tiger, from the fence. I would like him to be further away from the fence, and I need me to be as close as possible. So if I can get close and the tiger is far away, and then I focus through the fence, and we'll talk about focus in a second, then I should get pretty much that fence so far out of focus it will almost not appear in the picture. Focus can be an issue too. The AF, the autofocus, might focus through the wire perfectly successfully. Tends to work better if you have a small or single focus point. But if you struggle, then we can always drop the cameras into manual focus. Focus manually on the tiger, nice defocus fence line in the foreground, and we should be getting fairly successful pictures. So when you've got an enclosure like the tigers here, we're always having to work with relatively restricted angles. We can obviously only photograph from the public path, the path area, and that might be only along one side of the enclosure. So you're needing to kind of work the opportunities, just move yourself up and down the space that you have available and see if there's a better angle. Much like we were talking about earlier, you're not only thinking about the position of the animal, but also what's in the background. Does it help if you move a little bit to get perhaps a more natural background behind the subject that you're photographing? This is kind of a great example because the tiger's moved up onto the mound, and actually it's proving quite difficult to get a good position where we can kind of access the fence line nice and cleanly and still get a good angle on him. So proving a little bit difficult at the moment, but you need to kind of keep working those opportunities and then really just see what opportunities are going to present themselves to you. Sometimes, as we were saying earlier, patience pays, and if you just give the animal maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes rather than just 1 or 2 minutes, they may move for you, and then you get a better position anyway. So we talked a little bit earlier about the glass in the vehicles, shooting through the vehicle windows out on the drive, but many modern zoo enclosures also have glass viewing windows as opposed to the normal fence and a standoff fence. And it's a great opportunity for visitors to see the animals with absolutely nothing in the way, but does again present the photographer with some issues, with some problems. Now, just as Janet was saying earlier, the main issue with glass is not the glass itself, but the reflection upon it. So just as we were doing in the car, if we were going to shoot through the glass, I would want to be getting the lens right up to the glass and then preventing any reflection hitting the piece of glass that I'm actually shooting through. It also helps because certainly with things like the tigers, this is very thick glass. kind of toughened glass, I want to be shooting straight through it, nice and square on, not at an oblique angle. So if I can manage to get the tiger in a position where I can line up nice and square, stop that reflection hitting the front of the glass, then I should be able to shoot pictures pretty successfully. There is a trade-off, of course. You are shooting through glass that is designed to keep people safe rather than being for taking pictures through, but it shouldn't be discounted as an opportunity altogether. Another interesting point actually that we haven't really covered so far is just thinking about how light works with subjects. And the tiger is sat up on a mound now, and the light is falling on the tiger, means that the tiger is actually quite well illuminated, quite bright compared to some of his surroundings. And we would routinely be using the camera's exposure compensation feature just to nip that exposure up and down to prioritize the exposure on the subject, in this case pushing that surrounding a little bit darker, so that we're getting a nice exposed tiger with a slightly darker setting, and actually that makes for a good picture anyway.
So the weather has turned a little bit cold on us now, so we've come here to our studio in Knowsley where we can do some macro photography. We did mention macro earlier, so we thought this would be a great opportunity to show you what we do here. So I've just set up my prop that the animal's going to sit on my background, so I'm just going to do a test shot just to make sure my settings are correct. So we have totally changed our settings now, so I've gone into manual mode. I'm using a flash synchronization speed of 1/160th and an aperture of f14. So this is one of our New Caledonian crested geckos. This is Buzz, and he's been with us for about 5 years. He's very used to this, and we're gonna try and get some pictures of his beautiful eyes. So a really great feature of the A6 is its eye tracking, and I've set up my back buttons here to work optimally for me. So I've got my AF on, so when I press that button it focuses. If I want eye tracking, I've just set up my star button to do the eye tracking, so I can flick between the two functions really easily. So if I click on the star button, it catches his eye, and as I move the camera, you can see that it holds onto it. And if I lose it completely, I can go back to AF on and focus wherever I want to.
So that's about all we've got time for today. We hope you've enjoyed coming around the safari park with us during the session, looking at all those different animals. Just before we go, we thought it would be a nice idea to perhaps give 5 ideas, 5 tips to improve shooting in zoos and safari parks.
So our first one is be patient. The more time you spend with an animal, the more likely it is to get up and do something and be more interactive with you.
Number 2 is story. Thinking about the story that is contained within the picture. Pictures that tell a story will often do better than those that don't.
Number 3, think about your background. Always check what's going on in the background of your picture. There's nothing worse than getting home with your lovely, beautiful tiger picture and there's a nasty feed bowl in the background.
Number 4 would be knowing your subject. So the more time you spend with a subject, be it an animal in a zoo or a safari park or indeed anything else, the better able you are to anticipate what is likely to happen, and then you don't miss opportunities.
And number 5 is go out in all weathers. People tend to go out when it's nice and sunny, but actually a lot of the animals like the cooler weather and can be more active in that weather. Animals are used to living outside, so they do what they do in all weathers.
So there we go, 5 ideas to maybe help make the pictures in zoos and safari parks better. Just one final thought in terms of a possible career in this area of photography. Really just think about making your work different to everybody else. How can you add something unique and different to the pictures that you generate from all the other photographers out there in the world?
So thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed all the hints and tips. Thank you to Canon as always for supporting us, and a massive thank you to Wex for hosting these wonderful how-to videos.
If you are interested in all the various things that we do, whether it's in the safari park, up in Scotland, or all the other locations that we cover, then check out our activities on our website at wildarena.com and look for Wild Arena on all the normal social media channels.
If you have managed to use any of the hints and tips that we've included today, please do share your images with us with the hashtag WexHowTo.
Thanks for listening.